Hi, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning. I'm going to send a note to the Fetcher cohort. I'm not sure. Yeah, it looks like it's the same thing. Okay. Adi got in. Hi, Ian.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Mm.
Anita got in too.
Hi.
Lewis.
Hello, Judy.
Hi. And Matt. I have some of my Edgewalker community here. Wonderful.
Hi. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm so sorry. There was clearly some technical issue. I'm glad we're all on. Can we give it like a 30 seconds in case people also are going through the same technical issue? During this 10 seconds, I'm gonna just invite you to sit very comfortably and bring your blessing and your best intention to this 90 minutes together. Let's all breathe together. So appreciate calling from different parts of the world. Just knowing that we have nowhere else to go, nothing else to do. We're coming together to really look at some foundational questions. The science of philosophy, philosophy of science. And we're so blessed to have Ian, a respected leader in the field, to share his life, his passion, by asking some deep questions. We appreciate you. We appreciate you are here with us today. Once again, apologize for the technical issue, but what matters is we are here. It's my honor to invite my co-host, Judy. And Judy is the chairperson of the Frame Keeper Committee, which is an important part of the elders in the field of MSR. And they've been doing a fantastic job in this case. Judy, if you don't mind, please provide you like an overall the plan for the following 90 minutes. And most hopefully, if we can introduce Ian the best you can. I know people are very anxious to know Ian. Thank you.
Well, it is my great pleasure to, first of all, be your co-host, Shawan, and to welcome all of you here. And I know more will be coming in. So we're so happy to have you be a part of this conversation today. So I first discovered Ian when his co-author of Spiritual Audit of Corporate America, Liz Denton, who was a speaker at our last face-to-face MSR colloquium. Liz asked to interview me about spirituality in the workplace. And then I began to follow their work, and Liz stayed a friend. And she introduced me to Ian at our MSR colloquium 2 years ago. And Ian and I have been friends ever since, especially after I met his wife, Donna, and we got to spend some time together. Just like what a delight that was. He is really the creator of the whole field of crisis management. But more importantly to our group, he is one of the very first researchers in the workplace spirituality field. And the work that he and Liz did together is probably the most quoted work. Every dissertation mentions Mitroff and Denton, and it's had such an impact on legitimizing the field, because Ian was a very respected scholar before he started doing work on workplace spirituality. And he is now continuing to think about the biggest questions that face humanity and face the planet. And it's just a great pleasure, Ian, to welcome you and to start our conversation today. So Ian's going to begin with an overview of modes of inquiry, and then we'll open it up to discussion. And depending on how many people Liz is here. Welcome, Liz. Oh, what a delight. And so depending on if more people join us, we'll either have an open discussion if it's this size of a group, or we may go into breakout sessions if the group size grows larger. But first we'll hear from Ian, and then we'll be able to engage in direct dialogue. So welcome, Ian. Please take it away.
Hey, thank you, Judy. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here. Just to give you a little bit of background before I jump in, that how I got involved with all this stuff, that coming from a very, very poor family, having been raised in San Francisco, being good in math and science, it was only natural that I would go into engineering. In fact, one of the reasons why also is that as a young kid, I would walk across the Golden Gate Bridge and I marveled literally at the beauty of the bridge and what made it stand up. So when I got to Berkeley, I majored in civil engineering. Now, in our sophomore year, we were required to take a one-year social science class, which I absolutely loved, but my fellow engineers did not. And I was really astounded by that because I liked everything in high school. I got a BS in engineering physics, one of the hardest majors at Cal. Went on and got a master's in structural engineering. I even toyed with the idea of coming back and getting a PhD in sociology, but I had to make up too much stuff. So I switched to industrial engineering, or at least I could study industrial psychology and organizations. And for my minor, I took a 3.5-year minor in the philosophy of science because I could not put off any longer all this that had built up in me. I had this great technical education, but I wanted something broader because I was always interested in the humanities. And the philosophy of science I took really changed my mind forever. Without it, I could not have been one of the founders of the field of crisis management. Let me give you a very quick overview of 5 of the preeminent inquiry systems that come out of philosophy, particularly how they've been modified and how they live in every day, because they change from period to period. And then let's open it up for questions. So I want to give you a very brief overview. I want to talk about 5 inquiry systems. And I'm going to present them in the form of claims, what they claim about the nature of reality and truth and how to achieve it. So the first system is called expert agreement. It really derives from classical empiricism. But here's the claim. Truth is that which is the product of the strong agreement between experts with regard to the pertinent facts of a situation. The tighter the agreement between the experts, the more that it approaches the truth. So, for example, the fact that 97% of climate scientists agree that humans are responsible for global warming. It's taken as the definitive truth that we are indeed the primary causes of global warming, particularly after all other causes have been eliminated. The problem with this system is that no group of experts, no matter how distinguished they are, is up to the complex problems that we face in this world. Let me talk about the second inquiry system, which I call analytic modeling. Truth is that which is the result of the most rigorous theories that pertain to a situation. And both of these first inquiries are preeminent, are well suited for problems that are bounded and well structured. So there isn't much debate about how to represent the problem and what the modes of solution are. Let me talk about the third system, which I call multiple perspectives are multiple realities. Truth is that which results from witnessing a diverse array of multiple perspectives with regard to an important situation. So, for example, drug addiction. Drug addiction changes. We need to sweep in the views of families, psychologists, police, family counselors. No one of them has the absolute say on the causes or the treatment, but all of them are needed. So no single set of facts or experts is capable of capturing the truth of a complex situation. So this is for problems that are moderately bounded and moderately well structured. They're structured in the sense that you can lay out a sense of different perspectives. Now, one of the aspects of this inquiry system that is most important, because it really derives and goes back to the preeminent philosopher Immanuel Kant, is that data are theory and value dependent. There is no such thing as data which are independent of theories, because in the first inquiry system, expert agreement, you can collect facts without any theory. And in the second inquiry system, analytic modeling, you can construct theories without necessarily, well, indubitable facts or indubitable first principles. But in the third inquiry system, there is a dynamic interplay between facts and theories. Neither one is possible without the other. In fact, they're inseparable. Ever since Immanuel Kant, we have known that there is no such thing as uncovering any facts without a theory. Now, the thing is, going back to some of our previous discussion, mainly what is taught in education are the first two models. Namely, get the facts, construct the theories, pound theories, accepted theories into the heads of students. And that's fine, except that it's far too limiting in today's world. And let me move to the fourth inquirer. And this is dialectics. Truth is that which emerges from the most intense debate that we can arrange with regard to a problematic situation. A debate reveals the underlying assumptions with regard to the different positions involved in a situation more than agreement does. Because when we agree too readily, we gloss over the underlying assumptions of which we may be unaware of ourselves. Everything must be subjected to debate according to this inquiring system. The strongest debate. Now, the thing that this can be overwhelming, like the third inquirer, because one has to appreciate the value of debate and be open to it. The fifth inquiring system, which is philosophical school of pragmatism, truth is that which makes an ethical and a spiritual difference in the quality of our lives. So according to pragmatism, epistemology, the search for truth, how we arrive at it, ethics, what is moral, what is right, and aesthetics, the quality of our lives, are inseparable. And that little word makes means we do not have truth in pragmatism until we actually implement a set of ethical actions designed to make headway on a problem. Now, one of the most important aspects of pragmatism, one of its most modern and most important findings and discussions, is the notion of wicked messes. The social systems philosopher par excellence, Russell Ackoff, who had a program at the University of Pennsylvania, appropriated the word mess to stand for a whole system of problems that were so interconnected. You couldn't take any problem out of the mess and study it independently of all the other problems to which it was connected without doing irreparable damage to the individual problem and the mess itself. Wicked comes from the architectural planner, Horst Riddle, who was at Berkeley, who talked about wicked problem. A wicked problem is different from a tame problem. Tame problems are like exercises, like x plus 6 equals 11, find x. Namely, they can be defined by a single discipline or profession. In a wicked problem, no one single discipline has the final say on the nature of the problem. Well, Welcome to the world in which we now live, the world of wicked messes. There is not a single problem facing us that is not a wicked mess. Before I came on today, I was listening to the US Congress trying to investigate the causes and what would happen on January 6th. And the number of people that have to be investigated and looked at. One of the things about this last system with regard to the coronavirus is it's shown us that, again, no crisis is ever a single crisis. So when we come to the fifth system, we need epidemiologists who understand economics and economists who understand epidemiology, because every crisis is a wicked mess. And therefore it has to be approached as such. It's not a well-bounded, structured problem. In fact, the central task that we humans are charged is giving structure to the problems that we study and hence help define, and hence we look for a solution. The best we do with wicked messes, we cope with them. They never are solved. In fact, all of our coping strategies are part of the mess. There is nothing that is not part of the mess. Let me stop with that. We can go into a lot more detail. But instead of just going on and overwhelming us, I'd like to stop at this point, and I will go back over, I'll be glad to do that. But what I wanted to do is give you the spirit of what each of these inquiry systems are like. Each of them has strengths and weaknesses, every one of them. I do believe in the system of pragmatism because it's the most comprehensive. One of the things about pragmatism that always attracted me to it is that there are no superior or inferior disciplines. They're all interdependent. So I hate this term, absolutely hate the difference between, quote, the hard and the soft sciences. That is one of the biggest insults that one can level. Don't you dare tell me that psychology and sociology are, quote, soft compared to physics and engineering. Look, my PhD dissertation was writing a computer simulation of an N of one, a single engineer, how he did engineering design. And the formulas of engineering cannot be applied mechanically. And what I saw were all the incredible personal factors that entered into how he applied the formulas of engineering. And he was designing pressure vessels for PhD physicists so they could do their studies of fundamental particles. And one of the key things that came out, if a physicist came and put down and was contemptuous of the engineer ended up screwing the physicist, so it took a hell of a lot longer for he or she to complete their experiment. So, you can talk about, quote, these soft variables, but that's ridiculous because it had a big effect on something, quote, hard experimental physics. Anyway, let me stop there and be glad to talk, but I really want, what's on your mind, because this has to, hopefully it would be an engagement and a dialogue, not a monologue between us. So whatever anybody has a question, I'd be glad to try and answer. And one thing, if I don't know the answer, I'm more than happy or honest to admit that I just don't. So please, what's on your mind? I know this is a very, very fast overview of a very, very complicated subject. Anybody? Maybe I'll say one more thing. One of the ways when I teach this, and I teach whole courses on inquiry, it's part of when I talk about crisis management, a way to look at an inquiry system is that what are the inputs, the fundamental building blocks of knowledge reality that it accepts, that it recognizes, because each of them recognize different building blocks. How do they operate on them? Because they have different operators. What is the output? What do they regard as truth? And one of the most important aspects of a philosophical inquiry system is the guarantor. What is it that guarantees that if you start with the right inputs, building blocks of knowledge, operate on the right ways, that you will finally arrive at, quote, what is taken as the truth. And that's what the history of philosophy does. It shows you what people have regarded as the different fundamental building blocks of knowledge, how you should operate on them, what you regard as truth, and most importantly of all, what are the guarantors of knowledge? So that starting with all this stuff, we will finally arrive at knowledge. Okay, now I will stop.
Charlie Tackney has a couple of questions.
Go ahead, please.
Greetings from Copenhagen. Just two quick questions. I teach in the social sciences here, and I'm involved with research methods. So the first question that comes to mind, based strictly on what you've presented to us, is how did you organize the scope of knowing into these 5 categories? That's the first question. The second question is, if you look at standard business management textbooks on research methods, what we're usually, I'm sorry, I should unmask myself. What we're usually presented with is a kind of spectrum between like behaviorism on one side, and then all the way over to the other side into phenomenology and subjectivism. If that makes sense, right? It's between the very nominally hard science, pragmatism or positivism, to this other end of the spectrum, which is pure introspective phenomenology. I just wonder how you compare. So my first question is, how did those 5 modes appear in your mind to begin with? And secondly, how do you map those 5 areas against what I think a lot of students get to see between positivism and subjectivism?
Good question. The first thing, let me respond to the first thing, that I studied the classical forms of philosophy. So the first model, expert agreement, it's really empiricism. The second model is rationalism. The third is Kantianism. The third is Hegel dialectics. And the fourth is William James pragmatism. But what I did as I studied them, and I looked at the current form and the forms that they were taking in day-to-day inquiry. And I saw that they had morphed, or they had become like a form of empiricism in terms of how people use it, is expert agreement. Again, the best example I would give you is that, quote, 97% of climate scientists agree that humans are responsible for global warming. Now, it's not just sheer opinion, but it's based on their observational methods using the best methods of science. So that's where those come from. They come out of the classic history of philosophy. Now, with regard to your second question, what's really important is that, quote, the first 2 inquirers are what we generally call, quote, the hard sciences, hard empirical inquiry and hard theoretical inquiry. In fact, a classic example of the second model is starting with Newtonian calculus and Newtonian gravitation. One can show that one can derive the distance that a falling body falls in time t. So starting from first physical principles, one is able to derive a theory. That's the hard stuff. Now, when you get into the other end of the spectrum, pragmatism, it does include phenomenology. Only when you get to pragmatism again, what it does, it challenges the notion of hard soft. And it really says that gets in the way of our knowing. That, of course, because there is a phenomenological aspect of every one of these inquiries. In that sense, there's a soft underbelly of every one of them. But what people do, they only focus on the hard or the soft parts and neglect the interplay between them. I hope that gives you a response to what you're saying, Charlie. If not, please ask more. So there's a soft underbelly a phenomenological aspect to every one of them. Why? Because they're done by humans and they're done in a social structure. When I was at Berkeley, and I was a member of, quote, the Space Sciences Center that supported me for my PhD, there was a sociologist who showed the following. He showed how the social organization and design of a laboratory had a major impact on the production of physical knowledge. So listen to this. Imagine a long building you can, and the building is like a T, or like an angle. So you have offices going down, you have offices going inside. And here's what he found. The farther a student was from the central coffee clutch, which was at the intersection, the longer it took he or she to get a PhD. It was not the magical properties of coffee. But if you were far down the corner, you didn't go to the coffee clutch, talk about your dissertation, the work you were doing, and you're persistent on a false idea. Or if you went down and you talked with your fellow students, you got your ideas shot down and evaluated. So something simple like that had a profound effect. So, again, this idea of hard, soft. One of the reasons why I eventually ended up studying psychoanalytic ideas, and particularly the works of Melanie Klein, because Melanie Klein talked about splitting, how we split the world into good, bad, hard, soft objects, people, and the like. And she studied the origin of that. And you have to understand that in order to get beyond it, because in times of great stress, we go back to splitting, good and bad. And certainly we're adrift of that in the US, the way that both parties, political parties, are picking on one another. Anyway, I hope that helps. If not, please ask more. And mostly what we teach is the spectrum. And we don't talk how the spectrum really supports one another, because when you get to the fifth model, pragmatism, it really is a model about all the models. And it says, use the best data you have, use the best theories you have. Don't throw them out, just use them in a different way. You're not a rank empiricist. You're not an empiricist solely, but you're making use of it. In fact, all of these are about the management and the inquiry. In fact, I will say when you get to the fifth inquiry, you talk about really dangerous ideas, because what we are all involved with, as dangerous as itself, is the management of truth, the management of inquiry. And that is profoundly ethical.
Wow. Ian, there's all kinds of questions coming in the chat, and I think I have the order correctly. It would be Matt Polsky next, and then Julia, Tom, and Anita. And if I've missed anybody, they could jump in. But Matt, do you want to ask your question so the group hears it and so you're in dialogue with Ian?
I will try.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. As an edge walker, I like a lot of you. I walk between different worlds, and it can be very challenging. When I have my philosophy of science hat on, yes, I love what you're saying. I'm totally with you, but I also spend a lot of time with the mainstream, and the mainstream is at a very different place. The word truth is coming up an awful lot these days, for obvious reasons, given what we've just been through. But it's treated, I don't want to say superficially, but because it's important, but it's treated as as a duality. You're either telling the truth or you're lying. There's other words for that now, with nothing in between and no nuance. So I suspect we're missing opportunities to solve some intense problems because we can't see what we can't see. So I guess I'm suggesting, is there a way through this? Is there a way to kind of bring these two frames together to take the best of both, keeping in mind that duality does have all sorts of political and other power, and that to challenge it, you risk being treated the opposite of what you really are in some cases. But you risk being treated as somebody, who questions good science, which is what I would never want to do.
Well, let me respond to that. And the best response I can give, and it's not an easy one, is that every one of these inquiring systems places an immense psychological burden on us, a barrier on us. And again, the reason why I went to study Melanie Klein discovered splitting by studying very young children, how they would split the notion of the mother into good mother, bad mother. The good mother was there, served the kid's the man, and the bad mother had to reprimand the kid. She called that the paranoid schizoid position. She said at some point, the child's mind is not yet developed enough to know that there are two mothers. There one mother. There's only two mothers. It's only when the child matures enough, she called that the depressive position, where the child realized there's good and bad in every one of us. The point that I'm making is it takes psychosocial maturity to gain access to these other inquiries. So if you're in a dual world where there's only truth and lies, my God, if that isn't a preeminent example of splitting, I don't know which is. Now, I have to be honest and tell you that when I was a young guy trying to get tenure, if you think that I didn't go out of my way and publish and quote the top journals, and doing that was, I'd be lying. I knew which way the world was buttered and I did it. But when I got tenure, and I know people say, we were talking about this last, once I get tenure, then I'll really do what I want. I have to say, I started, I believe, writing maverick papers, even when I was untenured. Yes, I did it in the standard format, but I did what I wanted. So that's why I call it heroic inquiry. The farther you go along, or the further you go along in these inquiry systems, the more you're challenging established norms, and the more it places a burden on you to do what you think you need to do. And I would be less than honest if I didn't say that, because it poses an incredible challenge, almost suicidal effort for young people. And I know that. They're afraid of committing career suicide. And when I mentor, which I have, PhD students, I said, do what you want to do something out of the ordinary, but let's do it in a way that you can get published because you have a career. And my job is to help you span that. But in order to span that, one has to be aware of the immense psychological burden that if you do it, it's a burden. If you don't do it, it's a burden. But you have to realize what it's taking out of people. That's the best I can. I hope that gives you a response. It's a great question. Next, please, anybody. There's a lot of stuff, which is what I hope that there would be a good discussion.
Julia has a question. Julia?
Yes, thank you, Ian and Matt, for your question. So I'd like to preface by saying, yes, it is difficult, but I believe two things are turning the tide for this this idea that has been presented about the difficulties. And number one, I just like everyone to look at the pictures on your screen. This community is the space to take a stand against that kind of epistemological violence, if we want to call it that. That we are the community that give each other energy to do this important work. And I think that the younger people that I've met through the Fetzer Scholars and different places have a different value system. And I'm working with young scholars who are so brave, right? And they're doing this work. And so I just want to say that I'm just inspired. And the second thing, I have so many questions. The one I want to focus on is this idea of management of inquiry. And to think about, when I hear that, it's like I am outside of the process of the inquiry itself, and that there's a separation there. And I have taken more of a deep dive into indigenous relational ontologies, and I'm exploring in a small way quantum theory. I mean, I'm not a quantum theorist, but it gives me pause when I read about things that suggest that I can actually, as the observer, change what is observed, and that there's not a distinction, a separation. And so in these knowledge claims, how do you incorporate those ideas into your thinking?
Okay, first of all, let me go back. The first thing you said is, I believe that this is a unique community where we can raise these questions. The thing you said that really grabbed me is that it is a form of terror, epistemic terror, that to which we are subjected. And at some point you have to say, wait a second, that's not how I want to live my life. It's like talk about a binding, binding our head. With regard to the second one, there is no question social scientists and philosophers have known. Just by observing, we change that which is observed. So it becomes a dynamic interaction. You can go down to quantum physics, that kind of thing. But it's certainly true in the psychosocial world in which we inhabit, which means that as much as one can, and one of the ways we do it is by doing what we're doing, is become self-aware. In fact, what I would say is that to be a human being, to be anybody, you ought to have a good bout of therapy. And I'm not saying that in a disrespectful way. I really mean it. In order to confront our lives, what happened to us, how we surmounted it, if we have, what traumas to which we've been subjected, and how we heal. That I regard this community as one of the most important communities, groups in my life. I get a lot of sustenance from it. Anyway, I hope that responds. And I really appreciate what you said, Julia. Thank you. Thank you.
Tom Cullum was next. And Mark, I see you. I've added you to the list.
Thank you, Judy, and thank you, Ian, for this great presentation. Your discussion of the tea, or the people having to walk to the center to get their coffee, reminds me of when I ask my business students what it is that makes business function. They'll talk about labor, they'll talk about capital, they'll talk about all the traditional things. And then I ask them, well, if you go into the grocery store and one day the milk is half a liter when it says it's a liter, and the next day it's rotten, would you buy it? Would you keep going back? And of course they say, absolutely not. And I say, well, what's behind that? And what's behind it, of course, is trust that the organization that's delivering something is going to deliver what they said they would. But it's never included in any of the, the factors of production, so to speak. So I think that's a really interesting observation. What I was wondering was, given that we're all part of this MSR community, given that spirituality arises out of a oneness, can you imagine a methodology that is unitary, that might kind of unify unify our approach to understanding spirituality, which I think is what all human endeavor is involved in anyways?
Well, again, that's what the last inquiry system, pragmatism, at least my interpretation of it, seeks to achieve. Again, let me say it again. Truth is that which makes, the word makes is important, practice, an ethical and spiritual difference in the quality of our life, where quality is a stand-in for aesthetics. So in pragmatism, it attempts to be integrative, integrate all the modalities. By the way, you mentioned something at the beginning, which I didn't talk about, but which is very, very important. Every one of these different inquiry systems makes use of trust. They don't always acknowledge it, but you have to trust the expert community to come up with, quote, the facts. You have to trust that you are indeed starting with indubitable truths in order to build a theory, and so forth and so on. So trust is an integral part. So that's why, again, I laugh at this hard, soft distinction. It ought to be just banned from the English language. That there's trust that makes every one of these things work, and without it, they collapse. And finally, again, that last inquiry system at least hopes to be, if not pretends to be, the most integrative of all. And in order to do that, contrary to positivism, there are no hard and soft subjects of inquiry. They're all interdependent. They all presuppose the humanities. You couldn't work technology and the sciences without the humanities, and vice versa. Anyway, let me stop there. Anybody else? I see a lot of chat numbers there. So
Yeah, there's at least 4 more people, and I'm sure more are going to jump in. And I do want to encourage those of you who are in the midst of doctoral research or other forms of research, if you want to share with Ian what your research is and ask him about modes of inquiry and how that ties to methodology or anything else that you'd like to have directly help your research. I know Ian would love to talk about that. So please think about that as a question. So Sadhna is the next in line for questions. Sadhna.
So my question is dialecticism culture sensitive? People from different culture, they have a different way of exploring the truth or a discourse.
I'm sorry, I couldn't get it. Your voice was breaking up there.
Okay.
So you have to repeat it.
So my question is dialecticism is culture sensitive? For example, like people from different culture, they have a different way of arriving at truths or discourse.
Yeah, actually, all of these are culture sensitive. And dialectics, one of my lifelong friends and colleagues is Ralph Kilman, who's done a lot of work. He's developed a conflict instrument. And one of the things we know for sure is that different groups, even within a culture, and certainly different cultures, view conflict differently. And there are different forms of conflict. Not all conflict is productive, and not all conflict is destructive. So in dialectics, we're not talking about violent or physical conflict. We're talking about intellectual, cognitive, but it's also emotional and spiritual. But the point of dialectics, it says, we don't know truth, have no way of getting at it until we have witnessed the strongest, most profound debate that we can arrange between the two most opposing views of a situation. Because that will help to reveal, that's their assumption, the assumptions underlying these then different perspectives. See, the dialectics is the direct opposite of the first inquirer, expert agreement, where agreement is the way to truth, disagreement is the way to truth. Now, again, it's not that one is right, the other is wrong, but that they're different. And the point is to understand their way of thinking, because they're completely different. But that's what the history of philosophy does. Because here's the point. Depending on the particular problem, you have to say which of these inquiry systems is, quote, most appropriate for the problem of hand. If you only have one, you don't have a choice. If you have 5 and there are more than 5, you can begin to array and say, and you can blend them. It's not an either or. But that's, if anything, I feel like I'm inherited them all and I'm beholden to them all. And I appreciate them all. They're all important stages in the history of knowledge now. We've gone beyond classical empiricism. According to classical empiricism, you just open your eyes and your senses reveal facts to you. Well, that's naive. That's not the way, because now today we have very sophisticated instruments to pick up, quote, the facts, and we have different expert community. The trouble is, look, let me give it another way. My friend Ralph Kilman has pioneered the concept of a problem management organization, how we bring together different experts who are needed for complex problems, say like the coronavirus. One of the things about the coronavirus that drives me crazy, as soon as it was started to invent the vaccine, we should have started right away thinking about the distribution system. Oh, that's trivial. The hard part is just the medical part. Are you out of your mind? We've shown that a system is dependent upon how all of its parts work or don't work. Anyway, you get that because the last inquirement, it talks about systems. Everything is systemic. Anyway, I'm going on again. I hope that gives a response to your question. But yes, it's culture dependent. The use of it, many people are turned off by conflict, overwhelmed by it, confused. You have to be educated too. You have to appreciate it. You have to regard it as a resource, a valuable resource. Thank you. Thank you, Sadhna, for your question.
These are all
Sir,
such-
one last question. One last question.
Okay.
Yeah. So, sir, I request you to throw some light on how we should manage polarity in our life. Like when you say tenure, and then there are so many conflicts in our life, the extreme ends. So, how being a researcher or in general, even in organization also, how one should approach the polarity in life, the two extreme ends,
Well,
exploding and exploiting.
yeah. Now I'd have to move to a therapeutic mode. I'm not a clinician. I'm a fellow of the American Psychological Association, and I've had my own good bouts of therapy, which are helpful. And that I take on as a very personal kind of discussion. Yes, it has cognitive elements, but I think it has psycho-emotional elements. And there one needs a good trusted source or a helper to help when it's intensely personal. It's not just cognitive. It's not just weighing, that kind of thing, but to say, what is it related to early in one's life? How one grew up, the authority figures and all the rest of that. That's the best answer I can give you in a short time. And by the way, that is a different part of inquiry. And when I come to the fifth inquiry system, look, in the previous inquiry system, quote, feelings are, quote, subjective. In the fifth inquiry system, it says, that's a put down. That's again calling them soft. Whether they're hard or soft is irrelevant. The only relevant thing is, are they there and are they important, and how do we best address them? That's the point. Not to label them in a bad way, but to cope with them. And by the way, one only copes with messes, never solves them. So what are the coping strategies? Let's make this real. Due to the pandemic, I have a 12-year-old grandson. He's been out of school for a year doing Zoom. We know the severe psychological problems that kids are facing, because they've missed the whole year of psychosocial emotional growth, not just cognitive. And that's going to bear on them. And how we make up for that is a serious, serious issue. So at the very least be sensitive to these and not put them down, label them soft or that kind of thing. You can tell every time I hear the word soft, it flares in me, it pushes the wrong button.
Just to build on Sadhna's question about tenure can be a personal problem, but it could also be a systemic problem. So what would you say about tenure as a systemic problem in pragmatism?
You know what I'd say about tenure? The first part of tenure, not kidding yourselves and it's a survival problem. It really is. There's no question. And my own case, coming from a very poor family, there was no way that I was not going to get tenure. I'll brag a bit. I came up for tenure with 36 publications. I was a rate breaker because I was so determined, and I just had this burst of creativity. But it's a survival issue. I understand that. And we often bend to say, what is the system value? And we're like forced to deliver. And I understand that. All I can do is help my students do it in a way that they retain their soul, not completely sell out. Okay, that's what you got to do. That's the rules of the game. Do it, and hopefully over time, don't lose your soul, and hopefully you will be a force in changing it. There's a saying, and excuse me, don't let the bastards grind you down.
That's right. Thank you. Next is Anita.
Thanks for the informative session. I'm really grateful for the nice advice. I think we should work on these issues. And I just wonder, how can we work on self-inquiry? And is there a way to develop deep reflection on ideas and to work upon self-inquiry?
Say it again. I didn't ask your question again, please. How do we work on what?
Self-inquiry.
Self-inquiry.
Oh, self-inquiry.
Yeah.
So again, self-inquiry is again either by spiritual practice, psychotherapy, talking with others, being open to saying, wait a second, you're making an assumption, or this is how you come across, or here's what I pick up. It's the self. See, one of the things that I get from sociology is the self-construction of the self, the social construction of the self. The self is never finished. It's never an isolate thing. It's a community thing. It's a thing involved in inquiry, mutual inquiry, in community, and being open to say, wait a second, that doesn't make sense. Or how am I coming across? What is my shadow? What are the things of which I'm not aware? Being open.
Anita, did you want to respond or ask more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I just wonder, how can we develop, like, can we place self-inquiry into different modes of inquiry? Like when we see an object, it has its own expressions, and we reflect upon it on the basis of our own thinking. So is there any way to look at it from different angle to develop it?
Okay, I'm not sure I get your full question here. I have a problem with the sound that one of the things that I do when I approach a subject matter, something which I'm interested, I say, how would each of the inquiry systems represent it? What are the strengths and weaknesses? What do I learn from each of them? And what do I have to go beyond? And so, what I've tried to prime myself through my career is, even though I'm an advocate, a fan of the last inquiry system because it's the most comprehensive to me and includes all the others, is to say, look, there's a truth to every one of them. And how can I capture that? Excuse me. How does what I'm studying look different as I switch inquiry? And that's what I call the management of inquiry. I don't know whether that helps. And what does each of those say about me? What do they reveal about? What does the inquiring system reveal about the inquirer, the person? While he or she is attracted to one, can maybe see the truth in one, but not the truth in the others. See, that's what the philosophy of science really does. Now, again, when you get to the last one, because it goes back to William James, who was not only a philosopher, but a preeminent psychologist. You see the interplay between philosophy inquiry and psychology. I mean, he was one of the greatest psychologists and virtually starting the field. So when we get to the last inquiry system, look, when I do crisis management, one of the things that first came out in studying it were the Freudian defense mechanisms, why an organization thought they didn't need to do crisis management. And many of the rationalizations they had were the pure Freudian defense mechanism. Well, that's the point of the last inquiry. It encompasses as many of the different fields of knowledge that we can bear. And it calls for lifelong learning and studying those things that one thought one would never study, and learning from them. But that's also part of the fun. It's never over. It's endless.
I wonder if I could just build on Anita's question.
Thank you so much.
And take it to a personal level, if you will. You don't have to answer this question if you don't want to, but I'm wondering if you could, it's Tom Cullum here. I'm wondering, Ian, if you could talk about your own personal inquiry into spirituality. If you could just talk about your personal experience.
Yeah, it mostly came out of the Fifth Inquirer. It was mostly, I have to say, intellectual. It's like waking up one day and it just hit me that the field of management studies was neglecting one of the most important dimensions, aspects of human beings, that we're not just cognitive and emotional, but we're also spiritual beings. I think it was probably because of my reading William James, The Varieties of Religious Experience, and feeling it deeply. Well, I'll make it even more than that. One of the things that really changed me forever and set me on this path was the following. One of the most difficult aspects of philosophy, and one of the most interesting, is philosophy of religion. And that is mostly the proofs or the disproofs for the existence of God. What are the arguments for and against the existence of God? And I found that so fascinating that if you could get through, defining the nature of God, if you can get through that, defining almost anything else is duck soup, literally. If you want to talk about one of the most different, so I kind of laugh when people say, well, defining this is that hard. Say, how would anybody understand? If you want to learn the act of defining, go study philosophy of religion. So the various schools for defining the nature of God, whether it exists, he or she, is so incredible that it's like waking up one day and saying, wait a second, how is that lived in everyday experience? Because that's a philosopher approaching the question of God. But what does it mean in everyday life for us to feel a spiritual presence or essence? That's as best as I can give you. I don't know whether that makes sense. Because what it is, it's living philosophy, religion personally, taking it to a personal level. A very, very abstract study. There's the ontological, cosmological, and teleological proofs for the existence of God. Those are the three major ones. And they're all endlessly fascinating and intricate and great, great puzzles. And they're constant. The thing about philosophy, which is why I came to inquiries, they're constantly being revised. They never end. Even at one point, people say, well, the proofs failed. They're constantly being revised because they never go away. This fascination with this thing called God, this great mystery, never goes away. The ultimate source of our being. What is it that gives meaning and purpose to our lives?
Thank you.
Glad you asked that, Tom. Mark Krieger, glad to see you, and you're up with your question.
Not yet. Unmuted, yes. Ian, I want to thank you for putting yourself in the hot seat, so to speak.
Thanks.
And I, as you know, we've had some long conversations about some of these issues.
Right.
I'm gonna try to lead towards a key question, but I don't want to begin with the question because I think there's some background needed. Most of you really don't know me. So I'm going to give you a very quick 1-minute history of what I've done over the years. I started out like Ian, mostly interested actually in philosophical questions. And that led me to doing a doctorate at MIT, of all places, in philosophy and artificial intelligence. So Ian and I share that background in sciences and in engineering, or in my sense, software engineering. So from there, I ended up doing a number of things and ended up eventually, as most of you know, as a professor of strategic leadership. Along the way, I've been asked recently by a young student meaning a 60-year doctoral student at Case Western University, about issues of wisdom and wise leadership, which I think is among the most important and intractable issues facing social systems today. So there's a question under that: is where are all the wise leaders? I've been thinking very carefully as to what you've been saying since I was a philosopher first, studying many of the things that you studied. I want to try to slightly enlarge it for a second by giving you what I consider to be 5 elements that are slightly different than your 5 inquiring systems. And the 5 elements have to do with, on the one hand, scientific issues of scientific inquiry. Secondly, the area of East-West philosophy. You didn't really mention much of this, but to me, I actually I did a doctoral thesis in that area of comparative, actually Taoist and Chinese and Islamic mysticism. I also find that the third area that's really important, as you do, the social systems of sociology, psychology. I would add to that micro and macroeconomics. And for me, the last area that really is super crucial is the area of poetry and aesthetics. So when I put all of these together, I find, like the pragmatist, that I'm moving continually across them. What I see out of this is that we are at a crossroads, literally in human history at this point. And it's been emerging more and more rapidly since probably the close of World War II, when the East and the West met. I'm sorry if I'm boring you, Ian.
No, you're not.
Okay, good. Or if I'm losing you guys. So I'm trying to paint a picture that's very difficult to paint in say 2-3 minutes. And the picture is that if you ask the question, where are the wise leaders in the world today, and how do we generate the wise leadership of the future? It's clear that that's not happening in the political sphere almost virtually anywhere, certainly not in the United States, and I don't think I'd find it elsewhere as well. The Scandinavians sometimes have elements of that, but you can't find it very easily. So the question that I want to hand over to you is, how would you advise a beginning scholar, somebody who's a couple of years into their doctoral program, as to how to approach and study the issue of wise leadership and wisdom?
Okay, let me just go back a bit. That the philosophical topics, elements that you pointed out, I do recognize that many of these inquiry systems, quote, pretend to be scientific. They just do it in a different way. That's what I was saying. The thing that I'm most, I have to say, ignorant of, just don't know, are the Eastern approaches. I don't mention them because I just have not studied them, or at least it's superficial. And I'm
Right.
not saying they're unimportant. I just admit my ignorance. Now, with regard, one of the other things you mentioned that I think is really, really important, and it's only the fifth system, pragmatism, that even begins to mention it, which is poetry. Let me put it this way, that if you, I'll give you an example. If you read Hegel, there are literally sentences that are 3 pages long. If you can make sense of that, almost anything else you can. When you read William James and my mentor, Churchman, and his mentor, Singer, the ideas were hard, but you didn't fight the language. My example is if you're Philip Roth, you can write a sentence which is a whole paragraph long and it makes sense, but most of us can't do that. So the notion of style, one of my favorite books is The Element of Style by Strunk and Wright, how to write well. And now the most important thing you raised is wise leadership. And I don't know anything more. I'll just give you the standard thing is that by exposing people, at least the ones I've taught, come in contact with, as many diverse ways of looking at reality as possible. I mean, one of the things that I'm pleased to have developed along with several colleagues is something called assumptional analysis. How do you look at one's underlying assumptions, flesh them out, understand them, and critique them? Now, when I was at USC, I happened to have a next door roommate, so to speak, Warren Bennis, who was an expert on, quote, leadership. And Warren would really be the best person to respond to what you're asking. But the only thing I can say is that to give people the breadth of understanding that is, look, let me put it another way. Every one of these inquiry systems has a different definition of what is wisdom and what is wise. And one of the reasons for studying them is not just epistemic, but what they regard as wise. One of the things I always do is each of them has a different definition of, quote, objectivity, what it means to be objective. But they also have a deeper, embedded, not always at the surface, easily see what they call wise. And we need to have that discussion made more explicit. And that's what I hope we're doing here today, raising these issues.
Right, Ryan. I'm going to hand it back to you, Judy, in a second. But I want to mention just 2 quick things. One, since you mentioned Warren Bennis, my doctoral dissertation at Harvard actually was on leadership, and when I did that back in the 80s, I discovered there were 20,000 articles and books on leadership.
Yeah,
and people would say, well, why in the world do you want to write something else? And I said, it's because leadership is one word, but there are an enormous number of concepts that are underneath that construct. The second thing I mentioned comes from the East, from Lao Tzu, who has a very famous quote, and it's something that's, I think, pretty germane to what you've been doing. So you might want to quote, you probably know it. And he said, "He who knows does not say, and he who says does not know." So there's a paradox in a way in putting yourself forward like this, because it opens you to that particular observation, criticism, whatever you want to call. Comment?
Yeah, I feel, yeah, I understand that, but I feel the opposite. We are required to say, because that reveals what we don't know, and open ourselves up to be subject to that kind of feedback. And that's what I regard. And let me put it this way. the questions that have been raised today, that I look forward to those because they push me, what I hope is into a deeper understanding. And by the way, talking about Warren Bennis, I will never forget when I was at USC, the day when there was a leadership battle between Warren Bennis, who approached leadership, quote, poetically, philosophically, and the raw rank empiricists who thought what Warren was doing was rubbish. Oh boy, that was a battle I'll never forget. So yeah, I've been exposed to that. It wasn't pretty. Warren could appreciate them, but they couldn't appreciate him. That was a tragedy. Talk about the narrowness of education.
Well, it's the same thing that happened with Houston Smith. I mean, Houston
Yeah.
Smith was not considered as an Orientalist because
right.
he didn't know
That's right.
classical Chinese or any classical
Yeah.
languages.
No, the dominance of Model 1 and 2 in the
Right.
universities in Western inquiry. I know that.
Right.
You
So
people,
that in a sense is what all of us that are part of MSR in a way carry on our backs, is the fact that although a lot of what we do is extremely valuable, it's off the map because it's considered too mystical or too poetic or too what would I say, attempting to do too much with not being technical or
well, let me
precise
put it
enough.
another way. The rest of the academy is under the dominance of Model 1 and 2, rank
Right.
empiricism and theory. Sometimes it goes into Model 3, multiple theories and multiple explanation, that kind of thing. It doesn't do dialectics, and it doesn't do the philosophical school of pragmatism. So I know the battle we're up against. We hear it all the time. Are we, quote, legitimate? We're off the rails. I know that.
I wouldn't say we're off the rails. We are just in a different paradigm.
Well, we're off the rails according to them. Of course, we're in a different paradigm.
I think Matt, I'm sorry, Matt wanted to make a comment on top of what Mark said, and I think that's when that'll be the last comment before we turn this over to Shawan to wrap it up. So Matt?
Okay, I guess you meant one of my last comments. Just as a tiny piece of the question of wisdom, but I want to be very humble about it. Wisdom is such a huge and critically important topic, but just as a small contribution, I think trying to look more reflectively at the assumptions that we make as individuals and within society would be very, very helpful for even approaching wisdom, because I think there's a lot watching change making and many attempts to change things that have failed. I think a common unexpected denominator is that a lot of people are operating under incorrect views of the world, where their paradigms are at best only partially correct and really need rethinking. So it's just a suggestion towards the great question about wisdom.
Well, let me give you a quick comment. I'm a member of a research center at Berkeley, my alma mater, Center for Catastrophic Risk Management. We recently had a lecture on somebody who was part of the CRISPR team, and that's the team that's doing gene editing. That thing raises so many horrific questions, and it poses back to technology. Because we can do something, do we have the wisdom to not always do it? Because we can do something, because that technology, there are now CRISPR kits where you can create your own biological organisms in the sanctity but not safety of your home. So what are we unleashing on humanity without the proper safeguards? And that to me is one of the key ingredients of wisdom. Really challenging yourself that because you could do something, is it the right ethical thing to do for the fate of humanity?
That's a profound place for us to turn this over to Shawan to wrap us up. I know there's lots more questions, and I'm sure you welcome people to reach out to you.
Absolutely, please.
So I'll type your email in, if that's okay. I'll type your email in the chat. And if anybody wants to save the chat, the way you do that is you go down to the bottom box in the chat and there's 3 dots and you click on that and that allows you to save it. And this is recorded, so Tom will post the recording for anybody to send to others or to rewatch. But Ian, thank you so much for taking this time to be with us and in my case, blow my mind. I think about, I struck right in the beginning when you said Kant, in your reading of Kant, that there's no such thing as facts without a theory. And that's going to have me pondering that statement for quite a while. That was very, very mind-blowing. And there's so many things that you shared with us that expand us and grow our capacity for inquiry. So we're very grateful.
Well, just one quick thing about people who talk about alternate facts. We've heard that phrase, but they really don't talk about the alternate theories that are needed to uncover. So the facts are no better than the alternate theories in which they are based.
Mm. We need you to talk to government.
Yeah, good luck with that. Yeah.
Shawan, our great host.
Thank you, Judy. I want to second you by also thanking Ian. I call him Ian, but he probably preferred to be Ian. He's such a wonderful leader, as you can tell, for the past 80 minutes already. Just so you know, if you are joining us for the first time, wondering, I think Matt was the one asked the question, tell me more about MSR, what even that represents. So I will give you a quick kind of overview of who we are, what we are up to, and would love to have you back because it's a fascinating offering that we've been doing on a monthly basis. MSR, Management, Spiritual, and Religion. It's a special interest group within the Academy of Management. We are small, but you can tell we are very robust and alive. The purpose that we do in this case and has in our mission statement really is to really ask questions, ask big and deep questions that a lot of organizations don't have the patience asking nowadays. So we have the patience. And in this case, just give you a quick taste about what has been offered in the past. Thanks to our flame keepers, meaning our senior leaders in this field, been offering on a monthly basis. Session titles include, what are the questions we're asking? Jerry Biberman said. Well, his session basically winding down by say, let's not forget that we as a researcher, never forget what's the calling in the first place. Even though he framed as what kind of question we're asking essentially, it's actually what's led us to a researcher in the first place, that sense of calling, purpose, and meaning, and how we can bring that important part of calling to the work we do by asking some of the questions that needs to be asked, not just for the sake of tenure, like Ian just mentioned. Then Ian's question is even more profound, which you just experienced. From the very bottom, the ontological, epistemological level of what are the philosophers of science? And I hope you learn and walk away by really asking what different, you may have a different domains of inquiry, but to me, I am, just because I'm the host, I get to share a little more. I'm going to provide my feedback here. Mark, I'm glad to be connected with you again. And he referenced several, Chinese philosophy and religions behind it, which resonate with me a lot. For us as a human species, we tend to have such a tendency seeking for clarity, constantly make inquiry, to request, to quest, to understand, to investigate the world and our relationship within it. But so much of that, because of the mystery, the great creation story, or many other ways you understand how the world came about, which then who we are fundamentally. A lot of research in the scientific domain tend to look externally and to detach, like Julia just mentioned. But we understand that does not work that way at all. And then from the spiritual sense, more than often we tend to look inwardly. That's why a lot of meditation is designed that way. looking inwards. And there is a cosmology. There is a universe right there within our body, and it's a mirror and a reflection of whatever that is outside that make the whole thing even more complicated. So I guess the dance between clarity and ambiguity. So I think we encourage us to do that. Then I just give you a kind of forecast. In April, which is 2 months away from today, will be another wonderful offering by Chris Naslow. He will talk about prospective psychology in MSR research. Would love to have you back. It's going to be April 21st. However, I'm not going to let you go. In this case, I want, because during your talk, Ian, you mentioned about one conversation you had with one of your mentees. You say, I would like to encourage to expand your thinking. Then Mark, you also mentioned about this notion of the wise leader. Addie, who's another planning committee member who helped really issue a survey to our community. What we have received the feedback from our community member is some of the junior and the emerging scholar like to receive mentorship. Let me just pause here because we see most who's on here are senior leaders already. Let's just pause to remember when the last time you meant to make such a significant impact in your life, growing up, doing research, or survived your career early stage. It is my sincere invitation for us to think about that and to offer your service to the community, because we have growing number of requests from junior member of the community like to receive mentorship. I will share with you 2 quotes. The first one is actually from very popular TV host Oprah. She said, a mentor is someone who allows you to see the hope inside of you. So this is offered to the mentee side, hopefully you feel motivated. Then from the mentor side, my favorite politician, people hate politicians, but I happen to like a few of that. One of them is Winston Churchill. He famously said, we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. This is my charge to our senior leaders within the field to offer yourself to become a mentor. If both of you are ready to do something, we have something just designed for you. Exactly 1 month from today, in March, which is our monthly event, we will organize a town hall meeting. Would love to have all of you to come back. Would love to invite the people that the junior scholar, invite people that like to receive mentorship, invite them back. We can have a town hall meeting, really talk about what can be a best mentor program the MSR, this beautiful platform, can ever provide. Stacy, our chairperson, is right here with us. She understands this is critical. We understand mentorship make a whole lot of difference in a time such as this. It's difficult the way it is. Let's build this sense of community and care for each other. I have 2 more minutes. Any question for me? I'm gonna send a chat my email here. In case you feel so inspired and like to become a member, then join MSR. If you're inspired, like to offer your help, you say, Shawn, I have, like mark yourself, right? Have a lifelong expertise in certain field. I wanna offer that. Contact us. We will get you in the cube. My email address is there, xli@fetzer.org. Once again, we're small, but we're committed. We're committed to asking some of the most important questions in the world by asking what's the role of spirituality, what's the role of purpose and meaning to the practice of management and the business. We care about the managers. We care about the professor, researchers, no matter they are old or young. The sense of well-being, the sense of we're all in a fellowship group caring for each other is the best. Maybe it's the only thing we can do. Any final comments? I have a profound gratitude to Ian today for making yourself available. We can easily extend this to at least 2 or 3 more series by just tap into and pick up your brains. So profound. Any final words? Let me ask you, every one of you, to say one word. I'd like you to unmute yourself to share just one word as a way of reflect and end this session together. I will begin. Gratitude. Richard.
Enlightenment.
Lewis.
Alive.
Anita.
Wisdom.
Judy.
Expanded.
Julia.
Vitality.
Ken, can I hear from you?
Energetic.
Thank you. Matt. You are muted though. Well, Matt.
Someone understands.
I like that one a lot. Alice.
Excited.
Ian, you get to share 2 words.
I would say overwhelming joy.
We'll help you to alleviate that overwhelm. Mark.
2 words. Love and wisdom.
1 word, my friend. Okay, Addie.
Connect.
Tom.
Love.
Corinne. You're muted as well, my friend.
Sorry. Just humanness.
Humanness. Daisy.
Inquiry.
Thank you. Toyoko.
Desire.
Charlie, if you're still with us.
Fabulous.
The second Charlie, if you're still with us. Charlie, Tagni. Forget about Charlie. Satnam.
Perspective, different perspective.
Paul.
Community.
Liz, are you still with us?
Hope.
Okay. Nandini, if you are with us.
Connectedness.
I like this. We'll now hear from everyone except the Charlie playing him. Anyway, I love the power of ritual. This is the proper and fitting way to end such a wonderful session. Would invite you back in March for our mentorship program discussion. Would love to have you. Otherwise, April the 21st to hear from Chris Laszlo. Wish you a good afternoon, good night. We will see each other next time. Thank you so much, Ian, again, and also for your participation today. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chi. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.